Welcome, Robyn, to the podcast. It's so great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
All right. Well, why don't we just start by letting our listeners know just a little bit about who you are and your background as an actor. You're multifaceted. You have your hands in many different places, which I love about you. You're such a go-getter. So would you mind just sharing with our audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was a little comedy nerd in high school, like super shy and was obsessed with comedy. And so I am an actor, but I've always gravitated towards comedy and moved to Chicago right out of theater school, studied improv, sketch, and quickly found that I also needed to write my own shows. So I'm also a writer. And I do that, all of those things. I've produced a lot of things. I kind of do have my hands in a lot of pots, but I like it that way. I think I get restless when it's just one thing. So,
Yeah. So what propelled you to move from Chicago to LA then? Because Chicago is a great comedy and improv scene. There's so much that, is happening there. What made you make that leap over to LA?
a couple of things. I loved Chicago when I was there. It was so, so fun. And I felt like I did everything I set out to do there. There's wonderful theater in Chicago, and then there is wonderful comedy. And I always wanted to work for Second City. And so I worked my butt off, wrote a lot of shows, performed at all the improv theaters. And then I got hired there and I toured the country. It was amazing. And then I was planning to move to LA anyway, just because I always wanted to do TV, film, and just kind of branch out more. But they offered me a spot in their Las Vegas residency show. So Second City used to have a show at the Flamingo Hotel. And that was kind of my dream job because it was an equity full-time job. We wrote our own show, just performed on the Vegas Strip every night. And so I moved out there, and then 9 months after we moved out there, they closed the theater. So I had moved everything over there, and my whole plan was like, I'll do this for 2 years and then I'll be right next to LA. And then it closed. However, it was kind of cool because then maybe they felt bad, but the casting director, Beth Kligerman, she's this wonderful, wonderful lady. She, I think, was like, let's make sure they're taken care of. So I got to do a show out in Atlanta at the Alliance Theater. And then I worked cruise ships. So I was just a nomad for a couple of years. So I got to go all across the Mediterranean and then Hawaii. And I would never have been able to afford that on it, being an actor. So I got to just kind of live life out of a suitcase and then moved out to LA. But I always was LA bound, I think. I loved Chicago, but I always wanted to be like, in the big city where it's all happening. So.
Wow, that's quite an adventure that you've had. And you're right. I mean, when you're young, you're in your 20s, that's the time to explore and try new things. And how cool is that you got to go on cruise ships and travel and get paid doing what you love? Doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then on the flip side, then you get to LA and you're like, oh, it's harder to get paid to do things out here. So, I was prepared for that, but there's not like in Chicago, you could do there's more like corporate improv gigs and things. It's just easier a little in Chicago, I think at first. And then also by the time I got out here, I had more experience, but then I also was like, oh, I didn't move out here as an ingenue. So, that's a whole thing, but it's okay.
So, talk to me about that because it is kind of a rude awakening when you move to LA and it's like you have to start all over again and prove yourself. And I know I definitely experienced that. I actually remember I approached my old Chicago agent who had moved to LA. And when, I knocked on her door and had an interview with her, it was like I had to prove myself all over to her again.
Wow.
I was like, but you know me, you were my first agent. You know exactly what I can do. Why do I have to present to you what I can do all over again? So it's really interesting. The dynamic of LA is so different. What did you experience?
So different. And it's so funny because you were one of my first friends from Chicago who moved out to LA. And I think at that time I had no idea what you were talking about. You know, like you just don't know until you get to LA what it is like. And it was a little hard. You know, I went to comedy theaters that the great thing about improv is you have a whole community of people. So a lot of people had already moved out to LA from the comedy world. So that's fantastic. But there was also a whole crew of people who've been working their butts off out here in LA, and they're not going to be like, all right, Chicago people, come be in all our shows, you know? So I wasn't cast in like always the most prestigious comedy group when I first got here. And I actually ended up for the best because I ended up loving where I landed. But my ego was a little bruised a couple of times. I was like, oh, okay. And that kind of did affect my mental state for a while. And then I got over it. But that, and then I remember just like the flake factor is a thing. And now I am one of those people. I'm like, if you don't confirm with me 4 times that we're actually doing a thing, I'm not going to show up to coffee, you know, with you.
Okay. Hang on. You got to explain that to our listeners.
Okay.
You and I know what it is. People
Yes.
in LA know what LA flake is,
Yes.
but people around the world probably have no clue what we're talking about now.
Right. Okay. So I'm a Midwest gal. I'm from Indiana. And then in Chicago, where I spent many years, it's like, oh, Catherine, we're going to get coffee tomorrow at 11. Great. See you there. Or next week. Great. And then we will both show up. We may not talk about it. We won't talk about it. We will just show up. And in LA, I remember reaching out to some people in the improv community. They're all really nice people. They just had been out here for years. So they were busy with their lives. And only a couple people said yes. And then a couple people flaked. You know, you kind of have to triple confirm in LA. It's like, okay, we're going to meet next week. Great. And then like a day or two before, hey, we still on for coffee? Awesome. And then that morning text, hey, we still on? And there is a reason for it because you never know what your days are going to be like out here. You wake up and you could have 0 self-tapes. You could have 2 self-tapes. You could have a writing deadline pop up. You can have so, you know, and we all have side hustles. So every day is different. So I feel like I've learned a flexibility with my friends when I make plans of like, hey, we're going to settle on this, but we also understand if we have to shift, you know?
Yeah, totally. And people don't get that if you don't live in LA. You know, you do. You set plans, and then you're like, well, why didn't you show up? Why did you cancel? Didn't we make plans? I don't get it.
Yeah,
so, it's a whole thing. And I totally forgot about that until you mentioned it. Oh my goodness, that's bringing back like a flood of memories.
It feels very lonely at first, and now I feel like LA is my home. Like I love it so much, but the first, I would say, year or 2 felt pretty lonely. Yeah.
All right, so you went through the typical, you know, transition period of moving to LA. When did you feel like, oh, I made it? You know, like you started to notice shifts. Have you made it? No,
I don't feel that. That's why I'm laughing. Like, have I made it?
You made it, Robyn Norris.
Yeah.
I heard that they're presenting you with the Walk of Fame star. Next
so
month.
Exciting.
You've made it. No, but you know, like when did there is a moment where you there's that first struggle, and then you start to notice things are happening and shifting and going in a direction. When did you start to notice, like, how long did that take for you?
It took a minute in LA for sure. You know, I moved out here, I was teaching improv, I was doing everything, but I also didn't dive in the way I wish I had into acting classes and like really hitting it hard, because I was always doing so many things. Like I was writing and improvising, and it really hit me out here. Well, first, Second City and all the Chicago kind of getting those reps, that helped me a lot. I think if I hadn't had that opportunity, because you're performing all around the country, getting that validation from live audiences has helped me a lot, because I'll be the first one to judge myself all the time. But I know, like, okay, there's proof. People have laughed at things that I've said. That was huge. In LA, though, it's interesting because I moved here to do TV film, and I was writing a bunch of web series, trying to get stuff off the ground. And then I wrote a stage play, which is not what I moved here to do. I just did it to be like, here's another showcase. How can we, get people. So my friend Bob and I wrote this play, and it was in a tiny black box theater at Second City Hollywood. And it kind of took off. It just hit at the right time. And I felt it. I felt like a buzz, and there was like word of mouth, and some people were tweeting and posting on their own, not like people I had begged to talk about the show. And so that was strange, because I don't think I've ever been like the center of the spotlight type of person. I want to be an actor, and I am an actor and a writer and all of those things, but I also can be kind of shy. And this was like, oh, we created this, and it's like a thing, because it ran for several years in LA, and I got my manager off of it. Like, I remember him being in the audience and watching, and just with the biggest smile on his face. I didn't know who he was. And he approached me afterwards, and I was like, wow, this works. Like, so that was nice. And then that show ran in Chicago, and then eventually went off Broadway in 2019. It was like a crazy 7-year journey, which really took up all my life. And that, though, was like the best in terms of validation of like, oh, I made a thing, and it became an even bigger thing, and then it grew. And that was a little bit outside of me. I feel like I've always had to like, not struggle, but really work really, really hard. Like, hey, I created this thing. Anyone want to watch it? And that one was like, oh, people just wanted to watch it. So that was great. So I guess I would say that show. And that was several years ago when it started. But only now, since I've been back in LA full time, because that show took me Chicago, New York. I was on the road a lot for years. Now I'm like back in acting classes, writing, and I feel like I have the confidence to do that in a way I didn't have when I first moved to LA.
That's interesting. So funny how as actors, we need that validation. We can't give it to ourselves. It takes other people telling us.
You know what? I do want to tag on that, though, because I don't want that to be, and I don't think I articulated it clearly, as I got that validation. There were also a lot of downs in that show. It was a very difficult road for the show, behind the scenes. It's just hard to get something that off the ground like that. It's blood, sweat, and tears all the time. And I think there was a point finally where I became like, I'm such a people pleaser. And I think I realized like, oh no, it's okay. I belong here. And so I do want to say that for all the actors out there, because we all know that feeling of like, if I could just get this, if I could just book this one thing, and realizing, you know what, I might not book anything, and I can still create, and I can still do what I love. And I think that's important.
Oh, it's so important. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that's a real journey for young actors as we mature and we get to the point where we stop trying to please everyone and look for the right way to audition or create a role or book a role. And we start finding our own process and start really appreciating who we are. And I think once we find ourselves, that's where you really start to grow as an actor. So it's really important. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
We live and we learn. It's a tough life that we've created for ourselves being actors, but listen, we live and die as performers. It's what we love. So
absolutely.
Now tell me about your other passion, because clearly you're an amazing writer. You've written that show that took off. So you've got the writing bug as well. What is it about writing that excites you, and how have you found that that's helped you in your acting career as well in LA?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's a couple of things, because it excites me and I also hate it. It's tough. Like, writing is exhausting. And there's something, though, I think I've always been driven in a way, and I don't know where it comes from. I've just always been driven. And I don't think I could not write, if that makes sense. Like, so I moved to Chicago and I was, improvising, and I wanted to work for Second City, and it's very difficult to get in there. And I was like, well, I think the best way for me to be seen is to write something, and then I know I can be in it. And I so young and naive, however, it's so great to have that because I don't have that anymore. That feeling of like, great, I grabbed this guy in my acting class, my friend Hans, who was like the funniest person I knew. And I was like, do you want to just write something? And so we just did. We just wrote a 2-person show and we put it up. And then we ended up writing 2 more after that. And it was the best feeling, saying words and getting like, oh, this is working. And we created this, and I didn't have to ask permission. Now, not everything we did worked. Like if I watch some of those old sketches now, I'm like, oof, cringe. Like, however, that's how you learn, right? To write, I think if you just do it, you'll become better and better and better at it. So I really did write to create. And I forgot to touch on this. What I wanted to say also is when I came up in comedy, there weren't as many women as there are now, and especially in improv. And I purposely chose comedy at that time instead of just auditioning just for plays, because I felt like there aren't that many women. And I think this is a path where I can forge my own trail. So I did make that choice, even though now I'm like, all I want to do is have people cast me and not write anything. Sort of. I mean, I would like that as well. I'll keep writing, but I did choose that on purpose. And I think the writing was really just a way of like, I didn't know I had a voice. It turns out I have a voice, and just to write things and get to perform them and one of my favorite things is just bringing friends along and casting friends in things that I've written. And I hope I get to do it on a bigger platform again someday. That was really cool. Like for the Off Broadway show, to get to be like one of my friends who originated in the Los Angeles show, Chris, got to be in the Off Broadway show. And that was huge for me. I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I guess I'm meandering a little bit, but I like the writing, I like the result, and I like pulling people into it as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. It's funny that you mentioned that about, wanting to go into improv and comedy with a goal in mind. And it's so admirable. I remember taking improv classes. I think maybe a few years after you had already started taking improv classes, because I didn't start until I moved to LA, and I think you were already doing it in Chicago. That was like not even a thought in my head at the time. I remember being in classes and I'm like, there's a lot of guys. Like,
oh yeah.
You'd like be searching for another girl in your class. And I didn't even think about the fact that I was doing something at that time that wasn't really, like the thing for females. The fact that you were already in tune with that and had that vision says a lot about you, and shows why you've done so well in that area. So kudos to you, my friend.
Oh, that's nice of you to say that. Thank you. I don't even think it was that well thought out. It was just, I knew I wanted to do it. I did really love comedy. It really wasn't diverse though, especially back then across the board. It was, like white boys club. And so it was, there are some tough knocks you take when you're immersed in that.
Yeah.
However, now I feel like it's really important because I also have taught improv over the years, and I try really hard to look out for that and make sure it's, is someone like, is there only 1 or 2 females in this group? Are they getting stepped on, walked over, talked over? That's a big thing. I also coach, and I know you know this world too, in terms of like corporate communications and things, like being aware of who are the people that are always taking the spotlight, and how can you bring other people in? And improv is such a collaborative effort. So yeah, it was a little difficult being a woman sometimes. I mean, we were there. However, it's hard. And I think that informs my writing now as well. I really try to write female characters and try to, I like underdog stories and just kind of put people at the forefront. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting and fascinating when you talk about the corporate aspect of it as well. Curious what your response is then. because I was actually getting interviewed on somebody else's podcast earlier today, and they were talking about females in business. And so this is my question for you now. I'm curious, how can improv help females in the corporate world, in business, find their voice and speak up? Because you and I know how incredible improvisation is for speaking, but for women in business, how does that help them?
I think it helps everyone, and by it helping everyone, it can lift up people who don't always have a voice, if that makes sense. So a lot of what we do, I work often with a company called Business Improv, and we're going into these corporations, and it's just fascinating. And sometimes it's people who they don't communicate well. And sometimes, a lot of times they do. However, there's a reason they brought us on, right? And improv, the whole thing is everybody else is more important than you, or we're building off each other's ideas. So we're taking the pressure off of having to say the exact right thing, and not be wrong. And it's like, we kind of open that up, and it's like, all right, for these 5 minutes, everything goes. We want to hear from everybody. Say anything, everyone's going to have your back, and then build on it and build on it. And then another thing we focus on when you're in that group setting, I think it's important, is like, okay, we simulate real world meetings and what the challenges are when status comes into play, or when personal biases come into play. And how can you lift people up if you notice, like, oh, Marie hasn't said anything in this meeting, she's tried to like 3 times and gotten cut off. So eventually she just stops talking. Can you be the person that looks out and say, hey, Marie, you were saying something earlier, hop on in. So there's so many ways that we do this in various exercises. However, I really think it boils down to basic human communication. And then if you can create a culture through that, then people are aware, like, you can call people out. So you can call out, the guy that steamrolls over everybody, like, hey, Chuck, great. Like, let's go back to the other people. And people are okay with it if you create that culture. Easier said than done. However, I do firmly believe in improv in terms of how it helps people communicate better and really listen. I think we spend so much time waiting to talk and having a fear that our idea won't get out. And I've been in those scenarios where I'm like, this person's not going to hear me, so I'm just going to talk really fast and yell over them. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm not being my best self in that scenario. So that's where that improv comes into play.
Yeah. And it's so true. And it's so universal for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think back to acting and when we could audition in the room,
Mm-hmm.
is that happening again over there, by the way?
I think it is mostly for commercials, some commercials, which I'm not really pursuing right now. However, I know people have gone into the room. Almost all the TV and film is self-tape. And I think if you get to like callbacks, but even callbacks are on Zoom. But if you were eventually to get far along to like chemistry reads and stuff, I'm sure they're going to be in person, but it's mostly Zoom, mostly self-tapes.
All right. Well, still important to have those improvisation skills.
Yes.
All right. So what's on the horizon for you? What are you working on these days?
Oh, I've been writing a lot. My goal is I've got a pilot that I really like, and my goal is to write bigger projects and try to get those out into the world, things that I can't produce myself, like things that need a budget. I'm really into narrative storytelling now. Like, my background was improv and sketch. And then when I wrote this play, that was my first time like, oh, here's a story. So I've immersed myself the last couple of years in writing pilots and writing things. So I'm trying to write things, and then I'm trying to write things and film things. So it's a balancing act though. Every day I'm like, I wish I had more time. Yeah, but I'm trying to get back to like writing things that are also shorter that I can just goof around and film on my own, because I lost sight of that for a while when I was working on my play and bigger projects. And then I'm auditioning and taking acting classes and doing all the things. I sound like such a boring, like, I don't know.
You sound like an actor.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you do. Okay. I've got 2 things based on what you just said. Number one is with like short, funny content. Are you on TikTok?
I'm not, and I know I need to be, and I have. So this is the thing.
Good. TikTok is perfect. I am like, I need to be spokesperson for TikTok. I've only joined like 2 weeks ago, but I'm loving it.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I've watched TikTok. Here's the thing. I took kind of a break I'm on social media, but I took a couple years. I mean, if you look on my platforms, I haven't posted very much. I'm only just starting to again. And I think it's because that play that journey kind of wiped me out. I was promoting the show. I was creating content, like social content for the show. And I was doing that for years on like Instagram, Facebook, like Snapchat, everything. And I kind of just, and with everything going on in the world, I kind of just like took a break. And I am very aware though that I need to be putting more content out and want to. It's just like once I start, I know I need to put more out. However, yes, TikTok is on my list. I have ideas for little things to do, and I will be doing that shortly.
All right, stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen.
Stay tuned.
I'll let you know when I find out her TikTok name. We're all gonna follow her because I know she's gonna be putting out some kick-ass TikToks.
I love that you're like loving TikTok so much.
I love it. You know why? Because I made a conscious decision several years ago just to, in terms of my acting, to just focus on voiceovers. Because with the kids, it was just easier for me to not be so many hours on set in a way. And I still love the idea of performing, but voiceovers I could do in like 15 minutes. Amazing. And I could still be creative. And so now on TikTok, you can do these really short TikToks and you get to perform. I'm like, oh my gosh, the actor in me is like busting out. Like, I gotta do a TikTok every day now. I'm like, how can I perform today on the talk?
So this is you kind of took a break from on camera so much, and now you got that itch again.
Yeah.
And you can do it in bite-sized little things.
That's it. I need bite-sized performances, and the TikTok is fulfilling my needs.
Okay, well, I'm gonna follow you immediately after we get off of here because I did not know you were on TikTok. So this is gonna.
Oh yeah, I'm telling you, watch out. I'm embarrassing my daughter left, right, and center. She's like, Mom, delete that TikTok. It got 5 views. I'm like, well, isn't that the point? Like, oh no, it got 5 shares. People are sharing. It's on the For You page. I'm like, but that's the point, isn't it? Like, you want it to get out. And she's just mortified. So I figure the more she's mortified, the more I'm on the right track, right?
Yeah. That's hilarious. Oh, I love that. I mean, that brings up a good point though, in terms of actors creating content, because I think I've gravitated more towards wanting to tell longer stories, which takes longer to create. It's not like, oh, I wrote a sketch and I filmed it. I want to at least write a short, write a web series, that kind of thing. However, I am having that itch to start putting out just like short content. And the thing is, something may take off and it may not. And I know actors who've been discovered just from consistently creating their own stuff, and they don't have a lot of views, you know. However, it's like people in the industry can go and see like, oh, they're really funny, or, oh, this is a wonderful, they're charming. They can get your essence off of that. So I think that's maybe something important, because I get intimidated. Like, what if I create something and no one watches it, So
yeah. I think there's something to be said for it. And watch out, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it here. Robyn Norris is going to be nailing it on the TikToks. I'm calling it now.
This is hilarious. Oh my gosh. Now I feel like pressure to do. I want to. I will.
We can even duet, like international.
Ooh.
You can do. I haven't done a duet, but we can actually do a TikTok across international waters, you and I. Look at that.
That's pretty cool. Okay. All right. We'll set a date. We'll make something happen. Once I make because I think I do have a profile, but there's nothing on it. Once I post something and figure out what I'm doing.
You need a young person to help you out, like someone who's 12, like my daughter, she's 12. You need somebody who's that age, because they're like they do it so quickly, and they're like, oh, you just do this, that, and that, and you're like, what? Wait, slow down. I need to understand how this works.
Yeah.
But as soon as you do, it's unbelievable. Just need to spend a little time on it. Anyways,
Yeah.
we digress a little. One last thing I want to ask you,
Mhm.
because you've done so well with creating your own long form
Mhm.
content and with writing. And I think that's a really great place for a lot of actors to start, that you can't always wait for that phone to ring or that email to
Mhm.
pop up, that you need to be out there writing your own content. Do you have any little advice or words of
Mm.
wisdom of how to even get started?
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody. Some people are like doing it on their own and creating characters. TikTok actually is great because it's like you can play the two characters as yourself or that's actually wonderful. However, I also think finding someone to do things with you always is helpful. So, like, if you're in an acting class and you're not getting as many auditions as you want, or maybe you are, and you're like, hey, you know what? Maybe we write something together, or hey, I wrote this. You want to help me with this? But you really, honestly, my advice is just to start and not make it so precious the first couple of times you're doing it. It's really easy to do. And it's like, why don't you just write? What I used to do years ago is like write some stuff, grab some friends. We did not have film degrees. We did not have any, and just like, great, I'm setting this date to shoot. I don't even know what it's going to be. And then we're all going to get together and we would film things. And then my friend Sam and I, this back in Chicago, would edit them and we made stuff. And is it perfect? No. However, I learned so much and I got a lot of content out at that time doing that. So I would really kind of say, like, maybe set a date and grab a couple of people and be comfortable with not knowing everything that you're doing the first couple of times. And then, of course, eventually, like, bring in like actual editors and actual directors and things. You can find people in this industry who are wanting to make content as they're making their way up. So sounds it's not that easy. I'm making it sound like, yeah, just do this. It's so much work and energy to produce things. However,
No,
I
but
do.
you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. You start small and just go out there and do things. And these
Mhm.
days, it's so much easier than back in the day, like you're talking about with your
Right.
friend Sam. These days, you can do everything on your phone.
Yeah.
Like there's no excuses. And
Mhm.
you learn in the mistakes. You learn along the way. And
Mhm.
like you said, as you progress and you're at that next stage and maybe you have a little bit of money you can put towards an editor or film
Mhm.
person, but in LA especially, you've got the people that are also aspiring to be cinematographers, directors,
Mhm.
all the things. They also need the credits, so you
Yep.
collaborate and work together.
And that's going to take you so far down the road as well. A dear friend of mine, Brooke, she's a filmmaker and she's done a couple of projects and won awards and all of this. And now it's like, she did this project with this person. They're calling her in for an acting role. And like, it's like you start to work with people who then bring you in on their projects. So I think it's just creating that community and you never know where it's all going to come back around.
Love it. Yeah, it's so true. All right. Well, this has been a blast and so informative for me and for my listeners. Everyone now knows what an LA flake is.
Yeah,
Um,
LA Flakes.
we've talked about TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about writing your own content. Anything else that you want to touch on or leave for our listeners? I've got a lot of international actors that
Mm-hmm.
want to learn about what it's like to, be a working actor in
Mm-hmm.
LA. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you might want to tell people?
I think, well, two things. Do what you're already doing. If they're listening to your podcast, that's a great thing. And I say that as someone who, like, I'm a full-on nerd. Like, I listen to tons of acting podcasts, industry podcasts, so what you're doing is providing such a service. And I think if they're already seeking out this information, that's probably someone who's really inspired to do this work. So I think keep doing that. I do think creating a community, getting into classes, you start to find out what shows are being written, who, you start to find a community. And then the other thing is, we were joking about, like, have you made it and that? And I think realizing, like, you're I don't think I'm ever going to feel like I made it. It's like you achieve benchmarks that you set in your mind. And then you're like, okay, well, when's the next thing? And I struggle with this and I actively work on it, just like trying to stay in the zone of like, I enjoy this work. I'm not going to be like cussing at the wall. I might when a self-tape comes in and I have no time, instead, like, this is what I want. Like, this is part of the process. So yeah, kind of just knowing it's going to continue to be a process. But my main thing is like making things happen for yourself, and whatever that means to you, make yourself feel full. Like, I have to meditate every day because I'm a stress ball. Like, center yourself, whatever makes you feel good. And then if you are not getting the opportunities you want, maybe see if you can create your own. And the other thing about that is ask other people to do things. You'll be shocked at how people are so excited, because like, I was so excited when you asked me to do this podcast. I was like, oh my gosh, Catherine thought of me for this. This is so exciting. And you can be that person to other people, and I think that's great.
Oh, I love that. So good. Well, Robyn, it's been such a joy to catch up with you and see what you're up to. I'm inspired by you, and I always love hearing what you're up to. And I know you've got some amazing things coming your way. So thanks so much for being on the podcast.
I feel the same way about you. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Oh, thanks.